This is the Quiz Fix. I'm Cyril, that's Olivia. One true story per episode, one quiz at the end, because facts you tested on are facts you keep. Here we go. Imagine walking into your workplace at the end of a shift and deciding not to walk back out. Not because the building is on fire and not because you have misplaced your car keys, but because you are on strike. You sit down beside the machinery, keep watch, organize meals, and wait. That is exactly what thousands of auto workers did in Flint, Michigan during the winter of 1936 and 1937.
And this was not a small workplace dispute. Flint was one of General Motors' most important manufacturing centers. The workers were challenging one of the largest corporations in the world, a company that made cars, trucks, and enormous profits. The strike lasted more than 40 days, shut down much of General Motors' production, and helped establish the United Auto Workers as a major force in American life.
The event is usually called the Flint sit-down strike. It became a turning point not only for auto workers, but for industrial unionism more broadly. Before this strike, American unions often had their strongest foothold among skilled tradespeople. The Flint workers were making the case that mass production workers, people who performed repetitive jobs on factory lines, could organize together across skill levels.
That distinction matters. In a traditional craft union, workers with the same specialized occupation might organize separately. Electricians with electricians, machinists with machinists, and so on. Industrial unionism took a different approach. Everyone working in the same industry could belong to one union, whether they were highly trained mechanics, line workers, material handlers, or maintenance employees.
General Motors had built an enormous system around that mass production. Its Flint operations included Chevrolet plants and the Fisher Body plants, which produced automobile bodies. Fisher Body No. 2 was especially important because it supplied bodies to other GM facilities. If work stopped there, the effect traveled quickly through the company's entire production network.
The workers had plenty of reasons to be unhappy. Factory work could be exhausting and dangerous. The pace of the assembly line was controlled by management, and workers had little say over how fast it moved. Wages and job security could vary. Supervisors held substantial power, and workers who complained risked being fired or blacklisted.
The Great Depression made that power imbalance even more frightening. Unemployment was widespread, so losing a job could be devastating. At the same time, President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal had created a new legal and political environment. The National Labor Relations Act of 1935, also known as the Wagner Act, protected workers' right to organize and bargain collectively.
But a law on the books did not automatically change conditions on the factory floor. General Motors did not simply announce, "Wonderful, we recognize the union." The company resisted outside unions and preferred what were often called company unions, organizations that appeared to represent workers but remained closely tied to management.
The United Auto Workers was still young and relatively weak when the Flint campaign began. It had formed in 1935 during a period when the Congress of Industrial Organizations was organizing mass production industries. The CIO's strategy was ambitious: bring workers together in steel, rubber, auto, and other industries where traditional craft-based organizing had struggled.
Within the UAW, organizers such as Robert Travis worked to build support in Flint. The workers themselves were crucial. They distributed information, held meetings, recruited co-workers, and created networks inside the plants. The strike did not appear out of nowhere. It rested on months of organizing, frustration, courage, and careful preparation.
Then came a development that changed the timing. In late December 1936, workers in Cleveland, Ohio, struck at a Fisher body plant. Their action pressured General Motors, but it also raised the possibility that the company might move production or bodies from one location to another. Flint workers understood the importance of their own plants.
On December 30th, 1936, workers at Fisher Body No. 2 in Flint began the sit-down strike. Instead of leaving the plant and forming a picket line outside, they remained inside. That made the action both powerful and legally risky. The factory could not easily operate without the workers, and replacement workers could not simply be brought in.
It also meant the strikers had to transform an industrial workplace into a temporary community. They organized sleeping areas, food distribution, sanitation, security, education, and recreation. Baseball and card games might sound surprisingly relaxed, but the occupation was disciplined. The workers understood that disorder could damage public support and give authorities a reason to remove them.
The rules were serious. Alcohol was prohibited inside the plant. Workers were expected to follow instructions from the strike leadership. Equipment had to be protected. Visitors were controlled. The strikers knew that General Motors and local authorities were watching for any sign that the occupation was simply vandalism or trespassing.
And there was another essential part of the operation: support from outside. Family members and community allies helped bring food, clothing, and news. Women played a central role, especially through organizations that became known as the Women's Emergency Brigade. They organized fundraising, delivered supplies, and demonstrated on behalf of the strikers.
That outside support was not decorative. It was part of the strike's infrastructure. Workers inside the plant could remain there only if people outside helped sustain them. The Women's Brigade also showed that the labour struggle involved entire families and neighbourhoods, not only the men whose names appeared on factory payrolls.
General Motors responded through the courts and through public pressure. The company sought an injunction ordering the strikers to leave. A judge issued an order that set a deadline for evacuation. If the workers ignored it, they could face legal consequences.
This was a moment of real danger. The workers were not protected by a guaranteed right to occupy private property. The sit-down tactic had enormous leverage, but it also challenged established ideas about possession and authority. If police entered the plant, violence was possible.
The confrontation became especially tense on January 11, 1937, when police attempted to enter Fisher Body No. 2. The workers resisted, using fire hoses and other improvised defenses. The clash became known as the Battle of the Running Bulls, a reference to the police insignia. Several people were injured, but the police did not retake the plant.
That episode showed why the sit-down was so potent. A conventional picket line could be broken, and replacement workers could sometimes cross it. But inside the plant, the workers controlled the physical space needed for production. The corporation had money, lawyers, and political influence. The workers had possession of the machinery and the ability to stop the system.
The conflict then widened. Workers occupied Fisher Body No. 1 in Flint, and the strike disrupted GM plants in other cities. As production slowed, the company faced growing economic pressure. Dealers could not receive the normal flow of vehicles, and parts shortages spread through the organization.
Michigan Governor Frank Murphy was placed in a difficult position. General Motors wanted state power used to clear the plants. Union supporters wanted the government to respect workers' rights. Murphy called out the Michigan National Guard, but he did not order a direct assault on the occupied factories.
That decision was crucial. The Guard surrounded and protected some facilities which helped prevent violence from private forces or unauthorized attacks. But the troops did not storm the plants. Murphy also resisted immediate pressure to use force, recognizing that a bloody confrontation could make the crisis far worse.
The governor's position reflected the changing political climate of the New Deal era. Federal law had declared that workers had organizing rights, and public opinion was increasingly skeptical of corporations that used violence against unions. Still, this was not a simple victory for government neutrality. The state was present, armed, and capable of changing the outcome.
Meanwhile, negotiations continued. The union demanded recognition as the workers' representative, protection against discrimination for union activity, and improvements in workplace conditions. General Motors initially resisted recognizing the UAW, partly because recognition would give the union a formal role across the company.
Recognition was the central prize. Without it, individual gains could be temporary or uneven. With recognition, workers could bargain collectively and create a continuing structure for addressing wages, hours, safety, discipline, and job security. The strike was not merely asking for a better payday. It was asking who would have a legitimate voice at work.
The strike also revealed the limits of corporate control. General Motors was a huge company, but its operations were interconnected. A body plant, an engine plant, a parts facility, and an assembly plant depended on one another. Workers learned how to identify the points where a highly integrated production system was most vulnerable.
That is one reason the sit-down became such an influential tactic. It was not just a protest, it was a strategic intervention in the production process. The workers knew that stopping one critical link could halt many others. In a modern factory system, power could come from understanding how the system worked.
After weeks of pressure, General Motors and the union reached an agreement on February 11, 1937. The company agreed to recognize the UAW as the bargaining representative for workers in the Flint area. The strikers left the plants, ending the occupation.
The agreement did not instantly solve every problem. It was not a complete transformation of American workplaces, and not every worker received every demand. But recognition changed the balance of power. General Motors now had to deal with the union as a legitimate negotiating partner, rather than dismissing it as an outside disturbance.
The impact was rapid. UAW membership grew dramatically, and workers at other GM facilities pushed for union recognition. The victory also encouraged organizing in other mass production industries. Steelworkers, rubber workers, electrical workers, and others saw that large corporations were not invulnerable.
There is a tempting version of the story in which the Flint strike single-handedly created modern labor rights. History is usually more crowded than that. The strike depended on the Wagner Act, New Deal politics, CIO organizing, local community support, previous labor struggles, and the decisions of thousands of workers.
Exactly. The law created an opening, but workers had to make that opening meaningful. Organizers provided strategy, but the workers inside the plants took the personal risks. Community members sustained the occupation, while political leaders decided whether to use force. The outcome came from all those pieces interacting.
The story also has boundaries. The auto industry remained deeply unequal. Black workers often face discrimination and segregation, even though industrial unions eventually created opportunities that were not available in many craft unions. Women contributed significantly to labour campaigns, but they were often excluded from the most powerful formal positions and were frequently pushed toward lower-paid jobs.
And the victory did not mean that all employers immediately accepted unions. Employers continued to fight organizing campaigns, challenge labor law, and search for ways to weaken collective bargaining. The Flint strike demonstrated that workers could win, but it did not remove the need for continued organizing.
Still, the result was historic. By recognizing the UAW, General Motors helped legitimize industrial unionism across the country. The idea that an entire workforce could bargain together became more practical and more visible. That helped reshape wages, benefits, job rules, and expectations about what workers could demand from powerful corporations.
There is also something striking about the physical setting. The workers' power came from staying inside a factory that was designed to make cars. They turned that space into a meeting hall, a dormitory, a classroom, and a symbol. The machinery stopped, but the workers' organization became visible.
And the sit-down forced Americans to confront a basic question. Who makes a company valuable? Is it the buildings, the machinery, the brand name, or the people who operate the system every day? General Motors owned the plants, but the strike showed that ownership of equipment was not the same as control over production.
That question still echoes whenever workers organize in a large, complicated industry. The details of work change, technology changes, and companies change. But the underlying issue remains familiar. How should the people who create an organization's value participate in decisions about their work?
The Flint sit-down strike answered with a collective strategy. Workers who might have had little influence individually created leverage by acting together. They occupied the place where production happened, maintained discipline, built alliances beyond the factory gates, and refused to leave until the company negotiated.
So the legacy of Flint is not simply that workers won a contract. It is that industrial union power became real in one of America's most important industries. The strike transformed the factory occupation into a national lesson about solidarity, organization, and the economic power of ordinary people.
And perhaps the most memorable lesson is also the simplest. Sometimes the decisive act is not marching somewhere, but refusing to move. In Flint, that refusal brought one of the world's largest corporations to the bargaining table and changed American labor history.
And now a word from our sponsor, Fyrebox. That's Fyrebox, the easiest way to create quizzes that grow your audience. Whether you're a marketer chasing leads, a teacher building assessments, or a creator who wants more engaged subscribers, Fyrebox lets you launch a conversion-ready quiz in minutes. No code, no designers, no waiting. Try it free at fyrebox.com. Welcome back. You just heard the story. Now let's see what stuck. Coming up, a few quick questions straight from what we just covered. 4 options each. I'll give you a few seconds to think before each answer. Ready? Here we go. Question 1. On what date did workers at Fisher Body No. 2 in Flint begin the sit-down strike? A. December 30, 1936. B. January 11, 1937. C. February 11, 1937. D. July 5, 1935. The correct answer is A. December 30, 1936. Question 2. What made industrial unionism different from traditional craft unionism? A. It organized only highly trained mechanics. B. It organized workers across an entire industry, regardless of specific job or skill. C. It prohibited workers from bargaining collectively. D. It represented only workers employed by government agencies. The correct answer is B. It organized workers across an entire industry regardless of specific job or skill. Question 3. What was the Battle of the Running Bulls? A. A dispute between rival auto companies over vehicle designs. B. A confrontation in which police attempted to enter Fisher Body number 2 and the workers resisted. C. A vote by workers to join the Congress of Industrial Organizations. D. A factory fire that ended the strike. The correct answer is B. A confrontation in which police attempted to enter Fisher Body number 2 and the workers resisted. Question 4. What role did the Women's Emergency Brigade play during the strike? A. They negotiated the final agreement with General Motors alone. B. They operated the Michigan National Guard. C. They organized fundraising, delivered supplies, and demonstrated in support of the strikers. D. They replaced the workers on the factory lines. The correct answer is C. They organized fundraising, delivered supplies, and demonstrated in support of the strikers. Question 5. What did General Motors agree to do on February 11, 1937? A. Close all of its Flint plants permanently. B. Recognize the UAW as the bargaining representative for workers in the Flint area. C. End the National Labor Relations Act. D. Replace the sit-down strikers with outside workers. The correct answer is B. Recognize the UAW as the bargaining representative for workers in the Flint area. That's a wrap on this one. Thanks for sticking with us all the way through, quiz and all. If you liked it, hit subscribe so the next episode lands automatically. I'm Cyril, this was the Quiz Fix, and we'll be back soon with another true story worth knowing.